If you're just starting out in Sovereign Tower and think you only need to send the strongest knight to the right mission, I have some news. The game hides mechanics that make you lose knights, get stuck in the tower, or enter impossible loops without knowing why. In this video, I've separated 10 tips that Sovereign Tower does not explain. Stay with me until the end because there is a tip here that saved me and I couldn't find it in any tutorial. I'm Mary and the video is about to start. For me, this is one of the most interesting tips in Sovereign Tower because it turns the time demon into something much bigger than a simple undo button. At first, it's natural to think of it merely as a way to erase a bad decision or prevent a mission from ending in disaster. But once you realize that the knowledge you've acquired stays with you, the system starts to feel like an investigative tool within the narrative itself. I especially like the idea of failing on purpose to discover what is hidden. You can send a knight into a dangerous situation, observe the consequences, better understand their traits, secrets, and possible reactions, and then go back in time with information you didn't have before. It's almost like testing an alternate reality. That timeline may be lost, but what you learned from it becomes a concrete advantage on the next attempt. This also completely changes the way you play the RPG and visual novel. Instead of always choosing the seemingly safest option, you can accept a tragic failure if it reveals a new possibility, important information, or a dialogue response that was previously locked. The retention of archetype progress and the emergence of options like omniscience make it feel like the character is genuinely accumulating experience across timelines, rather than simply reloading a save. My recommendation is to treat every failure as a study opportunity, but without going back in time immediately. Read the full mission outcome, observe the changes in the knights, factions, and relationships, and only then decide if it's worth rewriting that moment. For me, this is the true strength of the mechanic. The game rewards not only those who make good decisions, but those who are curious enough to first find out what could go wrong. This tip is, without exaggeration, the one that most changes the learning curve in Sovereign Tower. The game sells you the idea that it's enough to match the attributes, strength, agility, charisma, magic, and cunning, with the mission requirements, and boom, guaranteed success. Except, reality is much crueler. Each knight carries a package of personality traits, fears, preferences, morals, vices, quirks, that weigh much more heavily on the final result than any number on the character sheet. In practice, this means you can send the kingdom's strongest knight on a seemingly perfect hunt and still suffer a critical failure because they are terrified of heights, hate crowds, or panic in the dark. The mission system isn't just an attribute check, it's a psychological compatibility test disguised as an RPG. And the game never shouts this at you in the tutorial. You only find out after losing a knight, offending someone, or getting stuck in an entire cycle because of a detail that seemed irrelevant. What I do, and strongly recommend, is treat traits as an absolute priority when queuing up missions. Before looking at the number, I look at what the mission description suggests. Dark Forest, diplomacy with nobles, relic recovery, duel, magic ritual. Then I cross-reference that with what I already know, or discovered by investigating, about each knight. Who is afraid of the dark? Who hates diplomacy? Who loves competition? Who gets along well with rituals? This keyword matching with personality is what separates clean success from unexpected disaster. This mechanic transforms Sovereign Tower into a game of knowing your cast just as much as managing resources. The more you talk, investigate, and observe the knights, the better you can predict not only whether they will complete the mission, but how they will react emotionally to it. And that impacts satisfaction, loyalty, and even who abandons the round table. It's that classic tip of the game doesn't tell you, but it's the heart of the system. Personality traits outweigh raw attributes, and ignoring this is playing on hard mode blindly. At first, the time rewind mechanic feels like a simple safety net. You make a mistake, go back, and try again. Yet the game turns this resource into something much more interesting because every excessive use starts leaving marks on the narrative itself. The most dangerous part is that these consequences don't appear in an obvious way. The tower starts to feel different. Some dialogues change quietly, and certain characters begin to react in a strange way, as if they notice something is wrong. It's a subtle change, but precisely why it works so well. You start doubting your own decisions and wondering how many times you've really messed with time. Therefore, my recommendation is not to treat the rewind as a button to erase every mistake. Use it when it is truly necessary, because there is a tracker recording how many times you have abused this power. The more you distort time, the greater the tension with the demon itself, and the game makes it clear that this second chance is far from free. For me, this mechanic makes Sovereign Tower much more engaging. Instead of simply reloading the game without thinking, you start living with the weight of every attempt, and with the feeling that the tower is watching everything. So, if you want to preserve certain relationships, dialogues, and events, think twice before going back in time. Sometimes accepting a consequence can be better than trying to fix everything. The game throws you into a loop of talking at the tavern, drinking with the knights, waiting for dialogue to reveal traits, and it works, except it's slow, expensive in action points, and early on you simply don't have the luxury of time. That's where the Steward, Lady Alwina, becomes your greatest ally. She exists to accelerate precisely that, revealing secrets and gossip that would take you several days to unlock manually. In practice, Alwina enters the game with the opening of the Intendancy around Cycle 3, along with other key characters, and from then on, you can use her daily action to investigate one night per cycle. The result is a report that brings tastes, fears, quirks, and other traits that would normally remain hidden behind random conversations or specific events. This completely changes your ability to queue missions with confidence because you stop guessing and start sending the right knight to the right context. What I do, and strongly recommend, is prioritize the Steward in cycles where you feel you are in the dark. If you have a new knight, one who already failed for no apparent reason, or someone you suspect has problematic traits, have Alwina investigate before risking critical missions. This saves action points you would spend trying to force tavern dialogues, reduces the risk of catastrophic failure, and above all, gives you quality information to make much more informed roundtable decisions. Many people take a long time to understand her value because, on the surface, she just looks like another NPC with dialogue. But Alwina is actually your internal intelligence radar. She transforms the chaos of hidden traits into actionable data. And that is exactly what separates a player who guesses from a player who optimizes. If you want to play Sovereign Tower in I know what I'm doing mode, using the Steward to force trait reveals is mandatory. It is one of the most powerful mechanics the game doesn't shout at you in the tutorial. For me, this is one of the funniest and most useful tips because the game turns an absurd joke, flirting with a stained statue, into a genuinely important decision for the tower's evolution. The Lady of the Tower is not there just to provide awkward dialogue or an unusual romance route. The relationship with her helps unlock new attachments and functionalities. What catches my attention most is how the romance blends directly with kingdom management. By winning her trust, you can open spaces like the blacksmith's forge and the witch's alchemy room, allowing you to craft weapons, potions, and other resources to better prepare your knights before missions. In other words, investing in this relationship is not just a narrative choice, it can also greatly improve your gameplay structure. I think many players might ignore this route precisely because it looks like a joke, especially when they find out it's possible to flirt with a statue. Yet in Sovereign Tower, this eccentricity fits perfectly with the game's logic. Weird characters, unpredictable decisions, and hidden benefits behind relationships that seem secondary. The Lady of the Tower ends up functioning almost as an expansion partner, helping transform the castle into a much more complete base. For this reason, my recommendation is to talk to her whenever possible and not leave this relationship until the end of the campaign. If you prioritize the right attachments, you can gain earlier access to equipment and bonuses that make missions safer, especially when your knights are still fragile. At the end of the day, flirting with the statue might look like a meme choice, but it is one of the smartest strategies to accelerate the tower's growth. At first, it feels natural to spend coins to solve the problems of the common folk and the nobility, especially when you want to keep all factions satisfied. However, treasury money is much more limited than it appears, and each seemingly small decision can be missed later. In my opinion, the biggest mistake is trying to avoid any loss of reputation. Some drops in approval are perfectly acceptable when they mean preserving gold to buy equipment, repair armor, or acquire important potions. Pleasing a faction immediately is not always the best choice, especially if it leaves your knights unprepared for upcoming challenges. I see this part as a lesson in priority. Reputation can be recovered over time, but running out of money at the wrong moment can compromise your entire campaign. Before spending in Throne Audience, I would always think whether that problem truly requires an immediate solution, or if it's better to accept a minor political consequence to keep the treasury healthy. This is one of those decisions the game should explain better, because many players only realize the importance of gold after having wasted a good portion of it. In Sovereign Tower, ruling well doesn't mean pleasing everyone all the time. It means knowing when it's worth sacrificing a bit of reputation to ensure the survival and evolution of your knights. The game teaches you to look inside the tower, balance factions, manage knight egos, solve daily quests, and naturally, you focus almost 100% on internal problems. Yet, in the home stretch, high-difficulty missions and large-scale events begin to demand more than stats and traits. They demand political context, and that's where alliances with neighboring counties come in as a hidden multiplier of success. What happens in practice is that forging bonds with neighboring rulers is not just lore or a nice story. These alliances directly affect how certain long missions, campaigns, and crises resolve. When you have an allied county, the game considers this external support as a factor of stability, extra resources, or even backup in events that would otherwise leave you in an almost impossible situation. In other words, the same mission that would take you down alone becomes viable or even easy when you've built the right network out there. I usually treat alliances as progression insurance. As soon as the game opens diplomacy mechanics with counties, I start planning which neighbors make the most sense for my playstyle and for the type of crisis I fear most at the end. It's not about saying yes to everyone. It's about choosing strategic allies that cover your internal weaknesses, whether it's a lack of resources, a lack of specific knights, or a lack of margin for error in critical quests. And yes, the game mentions that alliances are important, but it never shows you how much they weigh in the final outcome of difficult missions. If you want to reach the final cycles with peace of mind, don't leave alliances as something to do with their spare time. Put them on the same level of priority as balancing factions and queuing knights. Plan your external bonds with the same intention you plan your internal matches. In the long run, this network of allied counties is what turns a game of make a decision and pray into a game of make a decision and know you have support. It's exactly the kind of strategic layer the game doesn't shout, but completely changes the experience in the home stretch. For me, this is one of the most important lessons for survival. You don't need to accept every mission just because it appeared. Early on, it's easy to fall into the trap of wanting to fulfill every request from subjects, but each failure can reduce affinity, damage armor, and put your knights in real danger. In a game with permanent consequences, being a responsible ruler also means knowing how to say no. I prefer to view missions as risk investments. If a small task offers little reward, has no deadline, and still requires sending an important knight into a dangerous situation, it might be better to let it pass. On the other hand, missions with time limits, future penalties, and heavy impacts on the economy and factions should receive priority, even if they are harder. Another detail that makes this tip even more valuable is armor wear. It's no use always sending the same powerful knight to solve every problem, because a streak of failures can accumulate damage until it causes a permanent loss. The ideal is to observe mission requirements, combine attributes and traits correctly, distribute risks among the team, and repair armor before putting anyone back in danger. Ignoring a low-impact mission is not playing poorly, it's understanding that the court needs to survive in the long run. If a decision goes completely wrong, the time demon might allow a correction, but the best scenario is avoiding reaching that point due to a lack of planning. Sovereign Tower seems to want to teach that ruling is not pleasing everyone, but rather choosing which problems truly deserve putting your best knights at risk. The demon seems to offer exactly what any player wants: the chance to go back in time, fix a bad decision, and still keep the knowledge acquired in the previous timeline. Yet this convenience is clearly suspicious, especially because the power doesn't just work as a simple load save. It alters history and opens up new narrative possibilities. The scariest detail is the demon's own behavior. The more you use the rewind, the friendlier it seems to get. And to me, that's a massive warning sign. A demonic character that insists on helping, makes your choices easier, and never fully explains the price of this power is probably waiting for something in return. I would try to resist the temptation to go back in time at every mistake. It's very easy to enter a loop where you rewrite a decision, discover new information, go back again, and start treating timelines as simple disposable attempts. But every erased reality also carried events, relationships, and consequences that cease to exist when you decide to restart. Therefore, my recommendation is to use the demon's power with great caution, especially in important romance and story decisions. If it is getting friendlier and friendlier, it might not just be thanking you for the trust, it might be closing in on the moment when it collects everything. In Sovereign Tower, the question is not just, can I go back in time, but also, what exactly am I feeding every time I do this? This is undoubtedly one of the most out-of-the-box mechanics that Sovereign Tower hides from you. The game trains you to think in terms of perfect fit. Mission asks for strength, send the strongest knight. Asks for charisma, send the most charismatic. But what almost nobody tells you is that certain quests have secret, unexpected outcomes that only appear when you send precisely the wrong knight, the one who seems totally unsuited for the task. And these surprises can unlock secret recruits, story branches, or unique rewards that a normal success would never deliver. In practice, this means there is a second path of quest resolution that the game does not signal anywhere. You can, for example, send a kind and diplomatic female knight on a violent mission, or a cowardly knight into a challenge of courage, and instead of pure failure, the game triggers an alternative outcome. An unexpected NPC joins your round table, a faction reacts strangely but positively, or you unlock a follow-up quest that changes the course of the campaign. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes you feel like you're discovering real secrets, rather than just following a stat spreadsheet. I usually treat this as a controlled curiosity layer. When I already have the campaign more or less stabilized, I start experimenting. In certain secondary or low-risk missions, I deliberately send the knight who seems out of context, just to see what happens. The game even protects you a little bit here because many of these mistakes don't lead to automatic death, but rather to interesting side outcomes. And when you read the debrief carefully, you realize the game gave you a narrative clue, something that will make sense 2 or 3 cycles later when a new petition or event appears. The key point is don't do this irresponsibly on critical or high-risk missions, but also don't be afraid to break the logic of right attribute equals right knight on purpose. Sovereign Tower rewards those who understand that the quest system is not just a stat test, but a stage for hidden stories. If you want to unlock secret knights, alternate endings, and branches that regular guides don't show, sometimes the best play is precisely to send the wrong knight, because that's where the game delivers the outcomes it never warns you exist.